Yeah, I thought I would kind of set the scene by just talking briefly about mantis insects, which are kind of interesting in their own way and sort of stand apart from the other insects out there. So you can see here that what looks like a sort of pupil isn't a pupil. Mantids, the insects at least, have very acute vision, lots of little compound eyes and sort of fusing together the incoming sensory data around them. They're the only insect or the only invertebrate that we know at this time to see in 3D, like us. They have, yeah, so they have, although they might have tiny brains by our standards, they have very acute senses. And if you've ever encountered one out in nature, you'll kind of see that they'll very much turn their head to look at you. And you can see the one in the right here is actually wearing some custom made mini Mantid 3D glasses. And this was actually as a part of a research study to sort of looking at the mantid's vision. So what they did, they paired up the I'm not going to go into the fine print details of the study, but they kind of glued on temporarily with self-dissolving silicone or something these 3D glasses, and they showed the mantids like these like a screen with a rapidly moving thing that would basically simulate like a prey item, like another insect. And what they showed, what they sort of demonstrated through this research is that mantids have are possess 3D vision, but it only applies to things that move. They can't see in 3D when things are static, when things are still, as we can. But they can see in 3D when there's something moving, which might sound odd by our sensibilities, but that's just because they've been selected through evolution to have a 3D in motion sense, because that's how they catch their prey. And they're very good at that. They have a reputation. I mean, I did my kind of masters on insects, so I appreciate them more than most, and they're not the most kind of, I guess, loved group of animals compared to, say, birds and mammals, which generally people have greater affinity to because they're more relatable. Insects are alien by our sort of mammalian human standards, and certainly, no one's going to argue that a mantis is a huggable creature by any stretch. So you can see one here. Some of the larger mantids possess the reflexes to pluck hummingbirds out of the air and eat them. You can see this other mantid that someone found in their garden devouring a snake. So sometimes they will take on and beat vertebrates and eat them. You can also see in the bottom right image something else that mantids are sort of quite famous for, and something that obviously doesn't really bolster their kind of cuddly image, is that mating for mantids is very dangerous for the male, and the female will sometimes devour him during the act of sex, which will not in any way like abate his efforts. Even though his head tends to get eaten first, the body will sort of carry on, and he's also sort of giving his protein rich, nutrient rich body as a sort of offering for the next progeny. And that's sort of good for mantids because they only sort of live until that sort of point where they breed, and then they all will die after that. They live sort of short, fast little lives. But I should also say as well, this is a bit of an artifact of their captivity. In the wild, this doesn't tend to happen anything near as much as it does in captivity, where the female will eat the male. But it's interesting how males will sort of go about the courtship of the females, because when you're dealing with something that's as fierce as a female mantis and something with as acute senses, you have to do it very carefully. So, for instance, our European mantis, the male will sort of sneak up at distance behind the female, and any time he perceives her moving, he will freeze. And then when she freezes or hasn't moved in a while, he will then carefully make his way over to her, freezing each time he senses motion until he's close enough to then pounce on her and mate with her. And obviously, he's very much sort of not out of the woods yet and could get eaten after that time. Just to kind of, I think it's worth reflecting on how large insects are, or insect-like beings are sort of depicted in sort of much loved science fiction. So, because it just kind of helps highlight the human feelings toward the insect world, which is it tends to be pretty negative. Very rarely are giant insects the good guys. I'll say that much. So the main large image here is our image is taken from the sci-fi film The Fly, where a gifted scientist is experimenting with teleportation technology and he accidentally splices himself genetically with a housefly.
Mm.
And he starts to undergo this transformation as he loses his humanity and starts to shift into this human fly dominated beast. It doesn't end well for him. But one of the things he sort of reflects on as he's transforming and he's starting to lose his human empathy is the concept of insect politics. And with the point being, insects don't have any politics. Insect society is brutal. There is no compassion. There is no compromise among the insects. Then the image in the top right is the interstellar cockroach from the original Men in Black film, described as an adversary possessing unlimited strength, a massive inferiority complex, and a really short temper. And then last but not least, we have the xenomorph alien from the Alien films. And while this isn't sort of like as maybe explicitly insectoid as the other two examples, it very much is sort of riffing off or partly and resonating with the kind of insect vibe in the sense that it sort of possesses this thick exoskeleton, and one of the classic aspects of that creature is that it implants its young into human hosts, and then they grow and they erupt out. And this is a classic insect life trait. There's about 100,000 species of parasitic wasp that have exactly this way of going about their life. Some scientists think there could be 1 million species of these parasitic wasps, and if that's true, it would make it one of the single most successful life strategies for in existence because insects are so incredibly species rich. And yeah, this creature was described as um, being not being clouded by conscience, remorse, or delusions of morality, and being a supremely dangerous killing machine. That being said, so although just to kind of finish on the sci-fi film trope, so yeah, that kind of I guess gets across that yeah, large insects are scary and fierce adversaries. They can't be reasoned with. And they want our destruction, or they want to consume us or breed with us or something like that. But as another sort of like counterexample to that, that I think something that's good to sort of dwell on. This guy here, for anybody who's familiar with the original Star Wars trilogy, is Admiral Akbar, who is one of the heroes of the Rebel Alliance and their victory over the evil Galactic Empire. And he's less an insect man and more of a fish man. And at some point, George Lucas was sort of asked about this. He's like, why have you gone with such a minger as a good guy, as a goodie? And he kind of like sort of stood by this, and he's like, well, no, I want to make the point that like, people or beings that are intrinsically good do not necessarily have to conform to our narrow human standards of aesthetics. And the inverse applies. Just because someone or something looks really beautiful does not, necessarily mean it's intrinsically good. And I think this is a good thing, maybe, to sort of just bear in mind when we think about these mantid entities, is just because something to our human sensibilities looks very odd, or alien or threatening based on what we know of earthbound insects, that doesn't mean that those particular traits necessarily imbue the character of the being that we are perceiving. And what's sort of interesting to me, or what, is that, mantids aren't really sort of much, at least in sort of this corner of the world here in the UK, we don't really have mantids. I mean, some people keep them as pets, um, but they're not sort of part of our sort of wild fauna, although that is maybe changing. So very recently, just sort of late summer last year, it looks like some alien mantids from Europe have made sort of landfall in the very south of the UK in Cornwall and the Isle of Wight that look like they've island hopped from the Channel Islands. And maybe as the climate changes, they might be able to sort of gain a toehold here. We'll see. But it's interesting that mantis encounters seem to sort of crop up so much when the sort of wild animal form of the mantis, the insect, isn't really sort of part of our insect fauna in this part of the world. Humans have been sort of fascinated by and revered mantid beings for a long time, by sort of different cultures. So the Egyptians, the Mesopotamians, the San Bushmen, the Khoi in Africa have sort of revered mantids as sort of possessing supernatural powers. The ancient Egyptians considered there was a mantis entity that would act as a psychopomp and sort of help move along the souls of the dead. And interestingly, the Sand Bushmen have a particularly sort of interesting belief um, in this sort of mantid god called Kargan. And interestingly, Kargan was known to be a shapeshifter that could take the form of different animals. And that's interesting because that does crop up in modern accounts with the mantids, is that it seems that they can sort of change form. Um, and was also a bit of a trickster, which is it also interesting because in modern, at least modern psychedelic accounts, it tends to be the jester that more embodies the sort of trickster archetype. You can see here, the image on the right is a recent discovery from Iran, depicting what some people think is a praying mantis. And we always need to be a bit cautious when looking and trying to interpret rock art and drawings because we're liable to sort of interpret it through our own particular cultural lens. So we need to be wary of that. So not all archaeologists and folks sort of agree that it is actually depicting a mantid, but you can see there's certainly a sort of like a likeness there. Whereas the image on the left is definitely more compelling. I think this is a by like a depiction of the Hopi ant people, which I think are kind of revered to have thought to have come down from the stars. And you can see here that there's definitely some interesting weird stuff going on here in terms of the depiction of the being and whatever it is that it's emanating. Apparently, according to the Hopi, these beings were sort of perceived to be kind of messengers or emissaries of Great Spirit or the divine. And this is interesting to me because some people's interpretations of alien abductions actually is that the aliens that they're encountering are not alien in essence. They're emissaries. They're sort of taking on a humanoid form, embodying source consciousness. They're sort of acting as a bridge or a mediator, so we can have this more relational interaction with something that is ineffable and sort of beyond the human form. And that seems to have sort of independently cropped up here. Quite a few psychonauts have had encounters with these mantid entities. Terence McKenna reported in his book True Hallucinations an encounter with some sort of rather threatening mantid entities that he termed as space pirate mantids. Him and his partner at the time, Kathleen Harrison, were tripping on some homegrown cubensis mushrooms in Hawaii, and Kath started to sort of overheat, and Terence was really worried at the time. He thought she might be dying, and he got her under a cold shower to sort of cool her down. Meanwhile, his trousers he'd been wearing were falling down and dragging behind him, and it was like, well, very much sort of like absolutely zonked out of his gourd on these mushrooms. And then when Kath came back a bit, I think they both independently describe it. She later, when she started to come back and be more compos mentis, she described encountering or seeing these mantid beings, and I think Terence sort of saw them, and they were it was like they were firing an energy ray onto her as she was overheating. But what was interesting is that she got the sense that they were interdimensional pirates, and that they weren't part of the mushroom. They weren't intrinsic to the mushroom. They were just sort of using the mushroom as a sort of conduit to sort of come in and sort of have a tinker around. And this is interesting because while there are certainly negative or sinister mantid entities, they don't seem to be as common as sort of more neutral or generally sort of benevolent experiences. Tim Leary, on his first DMT experience, describes something. He describes these Venusian crickets, and who knows? Because they could be for a non-entomologist, they could be mantids because they do superficially look similar in the face. But what was interesting is he described on his first DMT experience, there squatting next to me are two magnificent insects, skin burnished, glowing metallic, with hammered jewels inlaid. Richly costumed, they looked at me sweetly. Dear radiant Venusian crickets. One has a pad on his lap and is holding out a gem-encrusted box with undulating trapezoidal glowing sections. Questioning look. Incredible. Um, and it's important just to sort of touch on, whether accounts such as Terence McKenna's or Timothy Leary's or others are maybe sort of having a kind of priming effect on other people. So people are hearing about these mantid entity encounters, and they're entering psychedelic experiences with this sort of prior knowledge of these beings, and then the experience is sort of conjuring them. And like certainly, and I know that issue's been raised with the machine elves under DMT as well, that maybe Terence had a sort of a cultural meme effect at sort of implanting the suggestion in the minds of many different psychonauts. And and I'm definitely open to that interpretation. However, I'm skeptical that that can explain the full breadth of these encounters. Like it might be able to explain some of them, but I think it would be a hell of a stretch to sort of infer that it can apply all of them. And yeah, David, who might join us later, recounted experiences of two colleagues who seem to be naive of the Mantis phenomenon, encountering these beings on DMT. He said, for one of them, it was their first time. And I assume they were naive because I was aware of how little they knew about the DMT and other psychedelic literature at the time. Certainly, they were perplexed and surprised to meet a mantis and reported knowing nothing of the scant and obscure literature concerning them. Furthermore, one associate, under the influence of ayahuasca, which contains DMT, had an experience of being farmed for their emotions by praying mantis beings. But it's not just psychedelics that these beings are encountered. And this is, I think, one of the most intriguing aspects of these encounters is yes, they certainly crop up with psychedelics and on all manner of psychedelics as well. I've more recently read some salvia experiences of people encountering mantids, and that really intrigued me because salvia is a very powerful psychedelic, but it's an atypical psychedelic. It's not working via the serotonin 5-HT2A receptors that your classical psychedelics are. It's working through a totally different receptor system in the brain. So the fact that people are taking this very powerful but very different psychedelic and also bumping into mantids, I found really intriguing. But it seems to me, at least suggested by kind of reports, that among the psychedelics, the mantids seem to crop up with particular regularity under DMT, ayahuasca, and psilocybin. They tend to be the kind of most mantid-rich psychedelics. Um, but aside from that, what's also interesting to me is that they're one of the more commonly encountered beings in the alien UFO abduction literature as well, separate to psychedelics. And and that's not the only state. It's not just those two states. So obviously, I'm sure some of you are well acquainted with beings such as jesters and machine elves, but for the most part, these seem to be psychedelic or DMT specialties. I've definitely read a UFO, an alien abduction account describing something very much like machine elves, but these very much seem to be the exception rather than the norm. Whereas the mantids are not restricted to specific types of altered state. So, as well as being one of the more commonly encountered beings under psychedelics and in alien UFO abduction experiences, they're also encountered with fair regularity in a variety of other altered states as well. So, during deep meditation, without having ingested anything, out of body states, dream states, shamanic trance states. I think they crop up in sleep paralysis on occasion. David recounted a tale of someone encountering one during a Kundalini awakening experience. So, yeah, this is something that I feel, as far as I'm aware at least, sets the mantids apart. I've not heard of another type of entity encountered with such sort of regularity across so many different types of altered state. And that was one of the reasons I was sort of motivated to research them. And I should say, this presentation I'm doing now is just based on what I've read and some of the testimonials and things shared. And I'm just about to release a survey in collaboration with David Luke and my friend collaborator Samantha Treasure to try and find out more about these encounters because it's not been studied in any depth ever before. Um, Come on then. Why is that not moving? Sorry, just bear with me. Oh, good. Um, so one other intriguing thing about these mantids is they're not just encountered in these sort of more classic altered state experiences, like psychedelic experiences, alien abduction experiences, meditation, out of body dream states. People also report encounters during the day, sort of going about their days. And these are quite sort of intriguing encounters. So there's been multiple reports of a mantis man or mantis men being encountered in a kind of remote rural part of New Jersey. And then more recently, as well, separately to this in Chicago, the New Jersey accounts are interesting because different people have been to this part of New Jersey and been fishing in a river there, and they've not known of each other or each other's experiences, but they've independently reported nearly identical experiences in terms of how it unfolded. So, for instance, like one of these accounts, the one of the guys was fishing in the river, and then he had this weird feeling that he was being watched, that eyes were on him. And he noticed all the sounds of the birds and the insect life seemed to just sort of dissipate, and it went weirdly, hauntingly sort of quiet. And then he sort of he turned around, and then he saw this mantis being that was like the size of a large human, large man, and it was looking at him, and he was initially obviously quite shocked. But then this mantis, he said he felt his mind being just sort of in a non-painful way. This mantis sort of just prized into his mind and just rifled through the contents of his consciousness like it was easy. And what was quite weird, he said, when this was actually happening, he felt quite chilled out about it, and he felt like the mantis had sort of chilling out his it was sort of chilling him out while it sort of gained access to his innermost sanctum of his consciousness. But then when it had done that and sort of withdrew, he then felt more panicky and more fear after this actual sort of like interaction. And this is interesting. So the themes of telepathic communication are very common, if near universal, when encountering these entities. There were also other interesting symptoms. So at the onset of the encounter, these guys described hearing this humming sound, and this sort of like there was this sort of vibrational humming, and um, and they couldn't really move from the spot. And that's interesting because that crops up with the classic alien abduction literature as well. Often we'll start with a feeling, electrical feelings and humming sounds, but that also crops up a lot with sleep paralysis as well. So yeah, I mean that's still no one kind of has got to the bottom of what the dealio is there, but interesting independent accounts sort of cropping up in the same locale. So yeah, to talk a bit about the mantids themselves in terms of what people describe of these beings when they encounter them. Um, so one thing to note is they tend to be large. They tend to often be human-sized, if not larger, so 6 to 8 foot. Sometimes bigger than that, up to 12 foot, and sometimes bigger than that, up to say 20 foot. And their limbs have compared to our arms and legs, they're often described as having an extra sort of like joints, and they have these. very sort of noticeable large eyes. Sometimes, or often, they're perceived as being jet black, but not always. Sometimes compound eyes, like an insect, but not always. And they kind of, as well as being very large, they, unlike our eyes, which face forward, they sort of they wrap around the head. Sometimes the mantis are perceived with kind of like facial appendages, but again, not always. And they can come in a range of different colors. Sometimes they're seen as possessing a segmented body. Sometimes they seem to have a kind of this carapace or sort of exoskeleton to them. Sometimes they're much less material than this. They seem to be just composed of energy or light, like a more holographic form. And so, yeah, and I kind of want to emphasize as well as the mantids taking on a variety of different expressions of form, of color, of appearance. Um, According to some experiences, they have the opinion that there's not a singular type of mantis entity, for example, but there's a whole sort of like myriad ecosystem of different beings. In the same way that, you know, there's not like a quintessential type of ant on planet Earth. There's many different ants with many different qualities. So, as someone sort of uh, remarked in that account that David Luke mentions, with someone having their sort of their emotions harvested. This is a really common theme that kind of crops up with these experiences is sensations that yeah, their sort of their energy is being fed on, or their emotions in particular are being fed on. And obviously, like for some people, this can be intimidating, and they sort of like are suspicious of it, or they recoil from it. But interestingly, other people don't find it to be a sort of negative thing, and they don't sort of automatically assume it is some kind of like parasitic negative influence. And sometimes people will sort of describe transactional experiences where the mantid might sort of consume some energy or some emotional energy, but then do give something back, like or something of that nature, or some kind of like therapeutic insight. Yeah, I think just to kind of reflect on the emotional tone of these experiences, because I find this really interesting. You know, unsurprisingly, for some people, these experiences can begin with a feeling of terror. Like if you've got a 20-foot or 12 to 20-foot larger than you alien insect being that's seemingly very intelligent, very advanced, looming over you to do Christ knows what, your yeah, an understandable reaction is fear slash terror. But what's interesting is these experiences don't usually play out like that, certainly not for long. I should note that, you know, there are sinister encounters. People do report sort of like traumatic, sinister encounters that are entirely negative and threatening and menacing in tone. But these do tend to be sort of outnumbered overall. At least that's the appearance I get from sort of you know, delving into this topic compared to sort of experiences of a more neutral or positive tone. Um, but yeah, when these it seems, according to some experiences, the mantids have exquisite powers of control over um, the types of emotional reactions that we might have. So some people feel that the like some people are surprised actually at their own reaction. I read an interesting account recently, and this person was in the presence of this large 3 meter tall mantis being on a kind of spaceship environment, and he was surprised that he wasn't freaking out more than he was, because he just felt incredibly calm and at peace with being in the presence of this mantis. being. Other people have described that the feeling of love that they get from these beings surpasses that of anything they've experienced in physical life. Some people are a little bit suspicious of the mantids' emotional motives. They think they can sort of use their ability to sort of manipulate emotions um, to sort of get their way with us, if you like. They can sort of like they can kind of put a shroud our mind in an emotional sort of mist of their own choosing, to kind of placate us or sedate us or chill us out. Whereas, yeah, that interpretations vary there, but some people think it might be more nefarious sort of kind of motivation. Some of these, sometimes though, there isn't really any emotional component to the experience. A little bit how you'd imagine encountering perhaps a giant insect, at least one of our insects blown up. There's probably not that much emotional stuff going on there, even if they've got acute senses. And it's like, yeah, there's sort of a neutral tone of detachment going on, and it's hard to sort of really read any particular kind of emotions going on there. So, as I've kind of touched on, one of the principal methods of mantid communication appears to be telepathy across these different experiences, across different altered states as well. Even with those prior ones I mentioned that were happening seemingly, with people out in the wild just fishing, and yeah, they'll have these sort of seemingly like mind to mind. Connections where yeah, there will be that sort of mode of communication. It crops up a lot actually in altered states between humans and different beings, entities of different types. And it's an interesting way of communicating because, obviously some of the sci-fi films sort of play on the trope of, if we actually encountered an alien, a genuine alien intelligence or alien being, like learning to speak to it could be a really like harsh bridge to sort of build. Whereas the sort of the telepathic line of communication that crops up so much in altered states between humans and other beings kind of like gets past that. It's like you don't need to learn someone's verbal language. You can just have direct mind-to-mind communication. So that seems to crop up a lot. However, it's not the only modality that the sort of the mantids use. A few experiences also hear the mantids making like chirruping noises and tonal noises and using and expressing audio communication. Intriguingly, when people have encountered multiple mantids in the same encounter, this is how the mantids are perceived to communicate with each other is through sort of sound, chirruping, chirping. Yeah, one intriguing thing that crops up in a lot of Mantis encounters, they have a thing for cloaks and robes, or at least that's how they're very often, not always, but often they are perceived wearing cloaks and robes. Sometimes medallions, as can be seen in this depiction here. One of um, the an experiencer asked one of the mantids about these medallions, and they said it's not a symbol, status symbol. It's a device of some kind with these medallions. And however, among the different sort of cloaks or robes, the most popular color appears to be purple. At least that's what I've got from the accounts that I've read. Um, and this is interesting. Why purple? So purple, if you go back sort of go back in time to like the Roman times, purple was a color of the elites. It was very much because it was so rare and precious. The dye used to sort of dye things purple, it was reserved exclusively for the elite, and anyone else caught wearing purple would get into deep trouble. And what's interesting is that when people have encountered mantids wearing different colored robes or cloaks together in this as part of the same experience, it seems that the purple cloaked entities tend to sort of occupy the highest rank in terms of what's going on. And some people interpret the purple robe mantises as being among the more sort of like spiritually evolved of this group of beings. Mantid beings are not as commonly encountered in UFO abduction experiences as the more classic grey aliens, I'm sure you've heard of, but they do crop up quite consistently. So this is, yeah, specifically pertaining to UFO craft abductions. And one survey found that they were reported in 13% of the time, and I think it was the greys were like 45 or something percent. But what's interesting to me is that although the grey aliens sort of more closely, superficially resemble us, experiences with them tend to be more unsettling and unpleasant than the encounters with the mantis beings tend to be, despite them being more alien-like relative to our human form. Now, one thing that crops up quite a lot actually is people encountering these mantis beings, um, particularly sort of under psychedelics, also as part of the alien abduction experience as well. And they will act as doctors or surgeons um, and also healers. And they'll sort of, and this is one of the things that sort of prompted me to sort of to study this more closely, not only because the mantids crop up across so many different types of altered state, but just like the very sort of high level of consistency of the nature of the encounters that people report. So, the amount of people, for instance, that have reported, described a mantis entity um, performing brain surgery on them while on DMT. And that can obviously be a pretty invasive experience for the person undergoing that. But interestingly, it often tends to be viewed retrospectively as a positive and helpful act. There are other sort of accounts of people reporting being healed of things. So one person he had issues with his liver that he feels are down to his alcohol use, and the on a mescaline experience, a mantis sort of came in and tinkered with his liver in a way that was helpful. And in ayahuasca ceremonies as well, people report these healing mantids, and sometimes like teams of them will come in and sort of work on you surgically, and obviously not sort of like it, although it seems physical, it's like a sort of like yeah precision energy surgery is what seems to be going on. But this is one of the more common um, types of experience or interactions that crop up with these beings. They also seem to take the role of scientists quite a lot as well. And I'll sort of go a bit more into that a bit later. But they are perceived by some people, some experiences, as seemingly being master genetic tinkerers. So they're really interested in the genetics of life on this planet but many other planets across the universe. multiverse. And yeah, they have a sort of particular interest in different forms, expressions of life, and of consciousness, and sort of, yeah, kind of tinkering and studying, observing that in its many different forms. Another sort of role of the mantids is that of teachers. So you can get some of the accounts of experiences are deeply personal. So a mantid will heal something that they consider sort of very much relevant to themselves, or it will say something that has personal therapeutic relevance to them, something that's, yeah, that's very sort of like relevant to the individual. But in other experiences, the interactions are far more cosmic in nature, we could say. And mantids will sort of transmit a variety of different insights and lessons, such as things pertaining to simulation theory, that we are just one of many inhabited planets or civilizations in the Milky Way galaxy alone, that there are many different dimensions and realities. Um, and yeah, things of that sort of like cosmic nature as well. Themes of kind of reincarnation come up, of Earth being a kind of school for souls. That sort of that consciousness is an ever evolving force. Things like this. Another kind of interpretation people get from these encounters with the mantis is they act as cosmic guardians and gardeners of consciousness. So some people perceive them as being very highly evolved and advanced beings, and that they have a great interest in the different forms of life and consciousness that exists across the galaxy, the universe, the multiverse. And that's actually, yeah, one of the lessons actually that crops up sometimes. And this is something that sort of pops up with other alien abduction interactions is the mantids or the other alien being will transmit their concerns about what humans are currently doing to the planet. That seems to be a kind of prominent concern, is like you're trashing your planet. You really need to get your act together, because this is a very precious place in the universe right now, and you should be savoring it and doing everything you can to preserve and protect and enhance it and the different forms of life that it supports. Which, yeah, kind of dig that. Um, Something that's quite intriguing, drilling down now into sort of the alien abduction encounter sort of reports in particular, is multi-species encounters. And there are quite a few accounts of people um, reporting contact with the classic kind of grey alien, but also the mantid aliens. And it gets deeper and weirder than this. So some people think that the mantids, given their apparent skills with sort of genetic manipulation and experimentation, that they created the greys. That the greys are sort of like biological drones or robots that are essentially made to kind of do their bidding. But what's interesting is that in all of these encounters of multi-species um, experiences, the mantids are almost invariably perceived as being the overseers, as being the most high-ranking beings or having the greatest authority over what's going on. They are running or overseeing the show in all cases, pretty much, as far as I've read. Um, It's interesting to reflect here. If we see this nice bit of artwork on the left depicting all those different beings, one of the things that intrigues me, it's depicting some of the more commonly reported aliens from alien abductions. So you've got your classic greys, you've got your reptilian, you've got your mantid on the far left. Yeah, various different denominations of greys, and you've got your Nordics as well, which look very human-like. Apart from their eyes are a bit sort of like apparently give them away. But something that intrigues me about this is how sort of they're not that alien compared to us. You could almost have a cup of tea with some of those beings, or nearly, maybe not quite. Maybe they're just a bit too far removed from us to sit down and have a cup of tea with them. But they've basically got the same humanoid kind of body plan in some sense. And that to me is kind of interesting. Because, you know, if we reflect, we might think that our human form is some ultimate endpoint of evolution, but it's not the case at all. Like, the only reason that we're here now at this corner of time and space on planet Earth is as the result of like many things of happenings of chance. I mean, the chances of us being here now are very, very slim. You know, for instance, the comet that came down and sort of wiped the dinosaurs off the face of the earth and all large animals everywhere on the planet at the time, that allowed the the kingdom of mammals to rise from the ashes, from under the feet of the dinosaurs, which were the dominant large form of life on the planet at the time. And if that comet hadn't come and knocked dinosaurs off their pedestal, it's unlikely that mammals, which then were mostly like little ratty things that could like hide in burrows out of harm's way, but also that kind of buffered them from the aftermath of the asteroid impact. Mammals start once the dinosaurs were gone and the playing field was clear, mammals started to sort of gain in size and in intelligence, and eventually, and at a very kind of recent point in time, if you're looking at cosmic evolutionary time, humans have been here less than the blink of an eye. And so, you know, and that's only the result of of various chance events, with chance very much being against it. So it's fascinating that people report encounters with beings that are alien to them, but not so far removed. They all have the same kind of humanoid body plan. They all have two eyes and sort of like nostrils, a mouth, arms, legs, hands, feet, you know? Um, and that's interesting because that may be kind of is something to do with how our brains model reality. And some people's interpretations of the aliens they encounter during the alien beings, as I mentioned before, some people don't see them as like other beings, like something else. They're like, no, we're all part of the same source consciousness. It's just a different expression of that. And some people will interpret the aliens as kind of like emissaries of source consciousness transmuted to a take a humanoid form because that's what we humans can relate to better. So maybe that's why there's a bias partly towards seeing such humanoid like aliens in alien abduction experiences and not much more aliens, for lack of a better term. Another fascinating aspect of human mantid interactions, and I've read a few accounts of this. I don't know how common it is, and I'm hoping that if I do some research on it, it will kind of like shed some light on this. Is that some people will report extended relationships, benevolent relationships with these mantid beings, to the point where not only will they encounter them, the same, seemingly the same being, on multiple occasions across time, in different forms of altered state experience, but they can also potentially summon them through will alone, which is yeah, which is really interesting. Another thing to consider here, which I think is interesting, is the impacts that these encounters can potentially have on people. And again, need to sort of do some research on this to be able to unpack this and sort of shed some light on it. But it seems very often that to the people that have these experiences, they are very vivid and 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 real to the experiencer in question. They're hard to sort of dismiss for many as a hallucination or a dream-like phenomenon. Like it seems to the from the experiences perspective, they're often perceived as being real beings. And obviously, real is a pretty sort of like interesting, slippery term when we're thinking about these different altered states. Um, but it seems, for instance, that some people will come away with a shift in how they view reality. So they will shift to a view of much deeper interconnectedness. They may shift to a more sort of multi-dimensional view of the universe, of reality. Their views on consciousness may change. So it seems like for at least some people, they may shift to a more idealist view of consciousness, where consciousness is the bedrock of reality and matter kind of is woven out of that, rather than the other way around, which is the current prevailing scientific view that sort of consciousness is an emergent property of matter and like the very complex organization of our brains. Um, so yeah, so these encounters can sort of be part of or ignite these dramatic shifts in perspective, or sort of deep spiritual, transformative experiences. They can sort of either evoke that or be part of that experience. And I think as well, you know, the shadow side is that I think for some people these experiences can potentially induce ontological shock. You know, where it's like your view of reality has suddenly been changed so sort of radically to such a degree, it's like having the rug from pulled from under your feet, and it can be quite sort of potentially destabilizing and potentially traumatic. I mean, I don't know how common these more sort of negative after effects of these entity encounters are, and hopefully, yeah, we'll be able to sort of shed a light on that by doing some research. So now, yeah, is the kind of the million dollar question, like what actually are these beings? Are they are they just, you know, elements of the subconscious? Are they just sort of like um hallucinations for lack of a better term, something conjured by the imagination, um, or are they archetypes that are animated, convincingly real archetypes, or are they some form of interdimensional um, or extraterrestrial advanced consciousness, or being that has a sort of has agency and existence that is separate to ours. Some people have taken the view, could they be us? In a very futuristic slash evolved state. So there's quite a varying amount of interpretation of what these beings might be. And yeah, looking at some of the more kind of, I guess, nuts and bolts explanations, which I don't think really maybe capture, you know, the full spectrum of these experiences and how incredibly sort of vivid and consistent they are. But you know, like it's some people have made the point that, we likely in our psychology have a kind of classic insect archetype because in Paleolithic times, insects could potentially be dangerous. They could certainly like give you a good old sting or bite. So deep in our psyche, there's sort of like there's this there's this insect kind of like model. And then when we're in these altered states, bearing in mind, it's when our brain is a model making instrument, if you will. And this is very much applying right here, right now in the physical waking state. Your brain is modeling reality based on prior experience and expectation. And then when you're sort of in these altered states, like dream states, out of body states, psychedelic states, it's that modeling is still happening. Obviously, a sort of like, and a bit different to physical reality in that those landscapes or environments that you're interacting with tend to be more malleable and kind of thought responsive than dense physical reality is. But could the perception of the mantid entities as something other, an alien, sort of be sort of slightly partly hinging on that sort of ancient insect archetype that's in our kind of psyche. Other people have pointed out that the mantis, the fact that they're so often performing surgery kind of the brain and stuff like that on when people are on psychedelics, but also alien abduction experiences as well. Could that be the sort of the model making brain weaving a narrative about what's happening under the psychedelic? So not only when you're under a powerful psychedelic like DMT, you've got different parts of the brain are all linking up and becoming deeply interconnected in a way that it doesn't normally do. But not only that, we know that DMT and other psychedelics are basically rewiring the brain at a fundamental level. They're creating new neural pathways, neural connections, new synapses, dendrites in the brain. So when we get this experience of the mantid tinkering with our brain and sort of rearranging bits, could it be our brain in that sort of very open, suggestible state, sort of making manifest what's going on? Because the brain's always trying to tell a story, and weave a narrative and make a model for what's going on. That's what it does. That's one of the things it does and puts a lot of power towards. But can those sort of, I guess, more neuroscientific current model of neuroscience sort of hypotheses fully account for the richness and consistency and vividness and impact of these experiences? And I'm not sure. And like, who knows? Maybe it's a bit of a mix of these things. Maybe like it doesn't have to be necessarily like it's all within us, it's all an internal generated illusion or hallucination, to we are directly encountering an external, interdimensional, extraterrestrial being. Maybe it's a bit of both, in the sense that, we have this rigid idea about the outer world being out there and the inner world being in here, but that doesn't exist really, although it seems like it does looking at it. The inner and outer are very much more liminal than we might otherwise aware, despite our construction of the ego making it seem like we are something separate and individual from the rest of the universe, from the cosmos. It's not. It's a play of light and smoke and mirrors concocted by, it's an amazing trick concocted by the brain. And sort of the inner and the outer is much more sort of liminal than we might know. So perhaps it could be some kind of mixture of some of these things. This isn't interesting though. So this is taken from a DMT report of a mantis encounter, recounted in Andrew Gallimore's book Death by Astonishment. And just bearing in mind what I've said about how the brain models reality, and sort of, it's got its source material it's going to call on to do that. And the brain being this kind of supreme model making instrument. One person on DMT had an encounter with a being and asked them, "Who are you?" A very clear image of a mantis crystallized in their awareness, with it taking a long, hard look at the experiencer. The experiencer managed to utter, "Really?" In response to this, the being replied, "No, not really. You could not truly understand what we really are, and so we appear like this to you." So that's another thing to consider. Like we've got our perception of what we think the mantids look like, but that by no means is necessarily, according to them at least, or some of them, their true form. It's just a form that's being concocted because it makes some kind of sense to us. And that can include the whole spectrum, like the cloaks and the medallions and the big eyes and the and all of it. Um, and I thought this is a good relevant snippet taken from an article on these beings and other entities in DMT experiences that was quoting David Luke, getting him asking his opinion of the nature of these beings. While it goes without saying that these drug-induced encounters are underpinned by neurobiology, David Luke says it's very difficult to account for certain highly typical experiences, such as having one's emotions harvested by a giant praying mantis. Is there a specific region of the brain that for some reason is hardwired to produce those types of experiences? I don't think so. It's too specific to fit this generic brain activation model. A host of alternative explanations have been put forward, ranging from the psychological to the mystical. Ultimately, though, Luke says that none of these explanations are satisfactory for a variety of reasons, and that it's best to keep an open mind as to the nature and origin of DMT entities. Just a little shout out to the Reddit group Mantis Encounters. So it's a 14,000 strong group that sort of kind of helped bring my attention to how seemingly common this very unusual type of niche entity encounter is. I mean, there's not like grasshopper encounters or beetle people encounters or anything. It seems to be something quite niche to the mantid entities. And that's sort of what helped kind of inspire me to look more into this and then want to do some research on it to find out a bit more. Uh, yeah, thanks. It would be really interesting, among other things, to hear what other people who've maybe had experiences or who haven't make of these beings. Like, how do they interpret them, their reality or not, and the impact that they may have had on people? I'd be really interesting to hear more about that if anyone feels willing and comfortable to share. And yeah, happy to answer questions. And I think there might be some in the chat, mightn't there? I think. I need to stop
Yeah.
sharing.
Well, Sam, thank you very much. That was very, very interesting. I love always like I've been to your talks many times. I love how you bring your knowledge and research from the, actual mantises, like actual insectoid world. I think that's very, very
Thanks.
important. Yeah, that's extremely important. I wanted to, so I have some notes, which is, so you mentioned two things that I also like, resonate with. One of them was um, that you said that someone said the mantises were almost like kind of showing interest or emotions to people
Mm,
to get access to their brain.
mm,
Um, I have experienced that. And then the next one was that could they be us from the future? So I want to touch on that. So my first ever mantis encounter was at a retreat, and that was my second time with DMT, and I didn't know I was like interested in psychedelics, but I didn't expect encountering entities. And then my experience started with going through a tunnel. At the end of the tunnel, I saw this elephant-headed being, that I had no idea about, Ganesh or Hinduism back then whatsoever. Then I went straight inside it. Then and I was in this world. I saw angels looking down on me. And then I was like, what are these angels like looking at me? And I looked around. I had my eyes closed, by the way. I'm just in a meditation mode. I'm completely forgot that I smoked DMT. I'm just in this, full dimension. And I looked around and I saw these fractals, like, the whole DMT world and fractals started making love with me. And it was became super sensual and sexual and aroused. And I was like, wow, like, I smoked DMT for the second time and I am making love with the fractals. This is great. And then and then and then suddenly this fractal thing started putting something gigantic in my mouth. And then and I was like, I'm like, because the previous experience was like very sexual, I was like, this is too much.
Yeah.
Everybody has their preference. That's not my preference. So like, I respect everybody's preferences, but that's not something that I fancy. So I was like, this is too much. So like, and then I
No,
was
that's
like,
fair enough, I
yeah, that
think.
was really invasive as well. So I pulled that thing out, but that the fractal insisted to put that thing back again inside my
Mm.
mouth. And I was like, what the fuck are you doing? And I literally like almost like pushed that thing because it was extremely invasive. Almost like, for the lack of a better word, like it's not nice to compare, but like getting raped by this, like this fractals.
Yeah.
It's so expensive, so like, invasive. As I pulled it out, I realized that like as I pulled it out, like that the fractals disappeared, and then I was in a lab, and these mantis were like looking down on me. And then it was the mantis being there was again for the third time trying to put this thing inside my mouth. At that moment, I realized that like the whole thing about the fractal, the whole thing about that making love was just a distraction from,
Mm.
from like distracting me from what was actually happening. Because I saw this mantis literally coming and putting this thing in my mouth again. And I was like, what are you fucking doing? They're like, don't worry. They're like, we are in control. Like, we're looking after you. And I could feel they were like they were touching somewhere between my skin and somewhere inside, almost like something ethereal there, like some sort of like a ethereal body that like we haven't discovered or like measured in science yet. But they were like upgrading. It felt like they were upgrading my DNA. There were several of
Mhm.
them, and I had lots of pins attached to my body, like the movie
Mm.
in the Matrix. And then they were like trying to put this thing inside my mouth again, and then it was, like when Neo comes out of the Matrix and then pulls this thing out of
Yeah.
his mouth. It was exactly like that. So
Mm.
I started like, and then they were just putting this thing inside my mouth, and then they were like, I was like, I'm not giving you my consent. Like, this you can't do it. They were like, no,
Mm.
you did give us a consent. You smoked DMT. I was like, what the fuck? Yeah, and
Yeah.
then the experience, like kind of finished, and I had two feelings. One was that they were upgrading me. I went in immediately to the person who shared the medicine with us, and then he was this Western white shaman, but who's been like studying, not like a Tuluminati type of shaman, but like
Yeah.
shaman, one of and then who's been living in the mountains in Greece and like studying, DMT entities. And then and then he said that he was like, spirits, referring to the mantises as like, spirits always watch us. And then when they think that we're ready for the next phase, they update us. And then the
Mm.
next day, I also had a feeling that these mantises were actually us from the future. So my future self was going through back in time and communicating with itself in the past, changing something. I had this feeling very, very
Mm.
powerfully. Then the next day, I had a chance to meet with David Luke, and then David Luke, without me telling him anything, I just said like, I saw these alien-looking insectoids. He said, "Oh, but maybe they're you from the future." I was like, "Wow!" Like, and then like back then, I didn't know much about the psychedelic literature and how common these things were,
Mm.
experiences. And they were like very similar to what you were saying, almost like Mantis to get to the agenda. They kind of distract you. But I
Mm.
gave this example, and I was interviewed by Graham Hancock's son, Luke Hancock, and then I gave this example in the podcast, and then he then told me a story of like of Rumi from Turkey, where like Rumi sees a guy. Rumi is like walking in the how do you call it, in the forest one day, and he sees a guy who's asleep, like he was like sleeping on the floor, and then he sees like a snake just goes how do you call inside his mouth. So he immediately
Mm.
wakes up the guy, tries to like force feed him rotten apples, and then the guy is going like, "What the fuck are you doing?" And then he's like, "No, you need to eat, you need to eat, you need to eat," and he forces him to eat these rotten apples. And then with the rotten apples like in his stomach, then he then vomits the snake, and then he then like takes the snake out, and then he sees that like he's actually vomiting snake, and then Rumi then tells him that like I saw the snake entering your body. I didn't have enough time to let you know that you had the snake, because if I told you, you would have how do you call, panicked, and then
Yeah.
we couldn't have got the the snake
Yeah.
out of your system. So I had to make you. So initially, Rumi looks like he's invasive, but he had good agenda.
Yeah.
So
Mm.
I found that very
Interesting.
interesting. Also connecting this to to Viracocha and Ganesh. So that thing that we're putting inside my mouth, it look all. I'm just because I'm looking at the context in which what I saw, because I first saw the Ganesh being,
Yeah.
and then later on in the internet I came across many other people who experienced Ganesh, and they all said that Ganesh puts its trunk inside their mouth, and that sucks negative energy. I'm like, okay, maybe that's what I was experiencing.
Mm.
And the same goes to Viracocha, because an octopus's tentacle is very similar to Ganesh's trunk.
Mhm.
So I'm like, is it that different cultures from different periods and continents interpret these experiences in a different way?
Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah. No,
yeah,
interesting. Just thinking like that definitely sort of like that crops up in shamanism and stuff and people going to the lower and the upper world and they're like the beings that they will encounter. It's like they're encountering beings, but those beings are like clothed in their culture, in their own cultural perceptions of what they think a higher evolved being is. So they're having
mm,
this sort of interface with something seemingly genuine, but it's something that's familiar to them based on their
mm,
particular cultural background. It's sort of like there's a sort of lensing filter, a little bit like that happens in near-death experiences as well, is that people are more likely to kind of encounter religious figures that are sort of like familiar to them, culturally
mm,
familiar. Things like that. There's a kind of like lens filtering kind of like effect there. But so no, that's interesting. And what you said about the consent is really interesting as well, because I know this has come up as like people questioning the motives of these beings, like do they have our best interests on their agenda, or are they a bit more nefarious than that? And people kind of bring up this issue of consent. It's like, well, they seem to be performing surgery and various stuff without your prior informed
yeah,
consent. But just as what you've said, which is interesting because that was coming from the entities, the Mantis entities themselves, was like the very act of smoking
mm,
DMT kind of gives them consent because you're entering their
mm,
domain. That's
yeah,
where they kind of live and operate.
yeah,
So you're sort of like free real estate basically for them to sort of
yeah,
like have a play with or
yeah.
upgrade. But
No, I had that experience as well. Like I met in a different experience. I had the inner voice that was telling me all night long not to smoke DMT, but I did it anyway in the morning with the sunrise. And this entity that I met, immediately I smoked it, and the entity was like, "I've told you all night long not to do it, and you still did it. Okay, you are like knowledge. You're hungry for knowledge. Okay, I'll show you that. Like I'll show you everything, but you won't be able to handle it." And then
mm,
it took me into this like fucking crazy universal ride. And then at some point it appeared on my shoulder and it was telling me, this is you're in our dimension and we are the boss here and I'll now take advantage of you. I was like, wow. But so that was, but it wasn't by mantis beings. It was by another like more like a mischievous gesture or machine of, and like some
yeah,
nature spirit, pixie. Um,
yeah,
Before I pass it to the audience, I also want to say after that mantis experience that I had,
mm,
my life has changed. So like they did something to me, like that experience did something to me because
mm,
um my psychedelic experiences have never been the same. I
mm,
started like getting, even if I smoke some weed, like I would just like start
yeah,
getting into. I remember the following week I was at a friend's house, and then we smoked some weed, and I started like seeing through the walls. That was a really
yeah,
crazy experience. I was on an acid microdose, and then I smoked some weed, and then it got
yeah,
intensified, and then I started seeing through the walls, and I was like, "Fuck!" Like they did something. Couple of weeks
yeah,
later, I had some sort of Kundalini awakening for an extended period of like maybe 3 to 6 months, like energy going through my spine. I'm like,
yeah,
I was like, those mantises, like they literally like, how they call, they literally install some sort of like a 5G Wi-Fi router in my body, that to like to
Yeah.
connect me to the source or whatever, and I was like, should I be worried? Because like, what if like they actually, having a direct impact on my, free will?
Mm.
But on the other hand, like kind of that experience made me more curious about,
Mm.
topics that we're talking today. I wouldn't be here, on this webinar and organizing it if it wasn't because of those Mad Mantis experience. They,
Yeah.
they kind of recruited us.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
it's interesting. You're definitely not alone
Hmm.
either, feeling that you've been sort of like there's been some permanent upgrade or opening or augmentation that's happened as a result of the mantis performing surgery or things
Hmm.
like this. Just yeah, there's David J. Brown who
Yeah.
did
Yeah.
David has a
Yes, yeah.
fascinating his first
Yeah.
experience with
His brain
DMT.
gets surgery, right? Yeah.
Yes, yeah, he kind of it was I think like early 80s when DMT was still relatively kind of little known, and he smoked three tokes of this DMT, and then this mantis entity appeared and pinned him down, and basically started to sort of perform surgery on his brain, and he said it was terrifying. And one thing that was interesting was that the mantis being, although it had a mantis-like form, it had his face. And how he interpreted it was that this mantis was because I think as part of his neuroscience work and research, he'd been working with animals in a kind of an experimental laboratory setting, and it was like the mantis being was giving him the experience of what it's like to be an animal experimented on by a never animal, a never more powerful animal. Because obviously
Mm.
those animals, be they rats or rabbits or whatever, they're helpless to our kind of whims. Whereas in this case, David was helpless to the mantis whim because it just had him pinned down and was tinkering with his brain without his consent. But what was interesting, although that in the moment it was quite terrifying, he it was like a big kind of turning point for his life. He feels like it was like that really propelled him into his kind of like his interest in altered states of consciousness, and he feels like he had a an upgrade, and he finds it that's affected his perception of reality from then
Mm.
on. And he finds it hard to describe what he means by that, like what the actual like specifics are. But there's this feeling that he's a different person now,
Mm.
following that experience. Um, yeah, and
I want
just
I want to draw a line there, by the way. I I mean, I question, like, could it be that what who we call as, prophets were actually, people like you and me that discovered psychedelics and then they then connected to this divine and then, they were just like, because, they were just like, recruited by these entities and then they then were like, working on their favor and then gathering people, to worship these beings, gods, like they were actually these entities that today people, encounter. And because I had so many experiences that I could only define by, the religious experience, and including an experience, meeting with the God. So like, and when you have an experience like that, you just can't undo it. You can't come
yeah,
back from it, and then you just come back, and then you just, can't stop talking about it. And I think, who we call as, maybe like the prophets, like they were those people, and then those that found those that managed to, have millions of followers and, turned into, religion. So like, because you can talk about psychedelics, but like if you don't if unless you have like millions of followers, you will just be into the cult category. But I think that when you have like millions of people following it, then it becomes like a religion. And I feel that all these psychedelic experiences come from this religious experience, and we call as prophets were actually just talking to these beings. On that note, in Turkish and in I think Greek, the name for mantis being is in Turkish we call it peygamber devesi or peygamber böceği, which means prophet's insect. So
mm,
prophet's camel. It's the same in ancient Greek, not I think modern Greek, but it's in ancient Greek. And I find that really curious. It's like why out of all the insects species. Like, why did these languages, these cultures chose the insect, mantis, and named it after, a prophet, like prophet's camel, prophet's, insect. I find that really quite, because like, by studying the language, you can actually like learn so much about cultures. So,
Yeah.
but there is no associations with it.
Yeah, no, no, it's interesting and definitely, obviously the ancient Egyptians, the Mesopotamians, the
Hmm.
San, like quite a few cultures have independently sort of
Yeah.
had deep reverence for the mantis, and it's been imbued with supernatural or godlike qualities across different cultures, separated by geography and time. But yeah, regarding the future humans thing, there's a particularly, I think David. Luke
Mm.
shared this with me, I think, originally, and it's Jeffrey Mishlove talking, who's a sort of who's a parapsychologist, and he interviews leading psychologists and thinkers on the sort of outer fringes of interesting weirdness, and he recounts this. I'll share it in the chat in case anyone would like to see it, but it goes deep
Mm.
into the rabbit hole of where these mantid thing experiences can take you. And
Mm.
what's really interesting in it is he talks about this guy, I think it's Ted Owens, who apparently had like who could like had psychokinetic abilities, and but he didn't say that they were like his own skills. He said they were gifted to him by this pair of mantid beings.
Hmm.
And he had this kind of lifelong sort of association with these beings that sort of bestowed, and he'd have to ask their permission in advance for him to be able to like use the psychokinesis, and then he would be granted it. But then I don't know if it was him or someone else, had this. I think it was someone else connected to him and Jeffrey Mishlove had this conversation or exchange with this mantis, and they felt strongly that they had been a mantis in a past life, and that while the mantids might seem to our sensibilities to be like deeply alien, they're really not. Like the fundamental consciousness of them is like some of people who are deep into kind of astral projection as well take the view that our consciousness has not just been human, we've lived alien lives on alien planets as well, and our sort of like fundamental consciousness will take on a variety of different forms to kind of
Mm.
expand its experiential knowledge base, and that the mantids aren't maybe as alien as we think they are, and they're like our own sort of like part of our greater interrelational web or family.
Hmm.
We're just swapping consciousnesses around between us. But yeah, it gets weird. At some point, Ted dies, and then his apparent deceased consciousness comes into someone while they're in that between sleep waking hypnagogic state, and then gives some information regarding the mantis or something. It all gets very weird, like multiple different types of altered state, messages getting passed between people and consciousnesses that people shouldn't otherwise know. Yeah, it's pretty intriguing.
I mean, by the way, before we move, I totally agree with you. Also, on in Quran, for example, Quran talks about that like there isn't just like three prophets. There's actually 140,000. So for me, like those can be 140,000 are could have been like the alchemists, the shamans, like all like mystical people of that time that were like working with these plants and then talking about these entities. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Shall we go with Tony? Tony, do you wanna you had your hand up for a while.
Um, yeah. The problem with having my hand up for a while is that a lot of the things that I was going to say aren't terribly relevant to what we're talking about right now. But so I just jotted down various things that occurred to me while Sam was talking. I mean, the first one is actually what you were talking about, Batu, about having this insertion into your mouth. Is very similar to in ayahuasca. Lots of people see serpents that actually go into their mouths, and then manipulate them from the inside. That seems to be from my reading quite a common ayahuasca experience. But
Serpents going down through
in
the throat.
yeah, through the mouth,
Okay.
yeah, through the throat, yeah. Um, um, just a couple of things I jotted down. When you were talking about the lack of emotion of the mantis beings or the mantids, and indeed the greys and other beings that people experience during alien abduction. One of the a statistically relevant number of people who claim to have had alien abductions say that they are brought onto the spaceship to nurture hybrid children. And
Hmm.
these hybrid children are a hybrid of human and alien, I imagine. I don't know, Batu, I don't know whether in Turkish you have this idea of the changeling. In British and Irish folk
Hmm.
culture, we have this idea of the changeling, where people wake up in the morning and find that their infant child has been changed and that what they have been left with isn't quite human. And their human child has been taken away, and the people who are being abducted feel that they have been abducted with the specific purpose of nurturing these children because the mantids or whoever understand that the human part of these hybrid children need that emotional input that the mantids themselves can't give them. And so they abduct humans to actually give that emotional contact with these hybrid children. That's just one thing that occurred to me while
Yeah.
we were talking about the lack of emotion. Um, Another thing I wanted to ask, well, I mean, Sam said just fairly recently about um, us us being in their domain and they having, if you like, proprietorial control over us while we're in their domain. And the mantids seem to be very interested in us, but do they only interact with us when we are having a psychedelic experience? I know you mentioned the fishermen in New Jersey and what have you, but in general, it would seem although they're very interested in us, they only interact with us when we are having a psychedelic experience. So that's a question for Sam. And here's another question for Sam: is that how on earth do you sit in front of a panel of people asking for funding for this research? I mean, how do you push this idea to them? I'd like you to give me a lot of money so that I can investigate insects interacting, giant insects interacting with humans. That's it.
Okay, yeah. No, happy to answer those questions. So the first one regarding interactions. So no, so definitely the old kind of like surgery trope definitely crops up reliably on psychedelic experiences, but it's very much part of the alien abduction experience as well. So sometimes the mantids are doing it themselves. Sometimes they seem to be running the show and overseeing the greys who are sort of doing that side of things, and they're acting as the overseers and supervisors. Um, and it's a good question regarding the nature and quality of the mantid encounters in other altered states. Like for instance, yeah, people bump into them quite a lot while just meditating. While deep in meditation, they'll bump into a mantid. But they crop up in other shamanic trance states and out of body experiences and dreams as well. Dream states they're reliably encountered. And yeah, it's a good question. I think only further research will be able to kind of shine a light, like how does the type of altered state correlate with the types of interactions and experiences that were happening. And hopefully, yeah, we'll be able to shed some light on that. And the second question regarding funding is I'm not getting any funding. So I approached David Luke, who is a sort of quite long-term collaborator now, and David specializes in researching the weirder elements of human experience. And I knew that David had already published research on the DMT entity, so I knew he had an entity in altered states kind of interest. So and my other friend, Samantha, she and me and Dave are already doing a study on the types of entity interactions people have as part of out-of-body experiences. And I said, like, guys, why don't we study the mantid entities? Because they crop up so much and so consistently. No one's ever researched them before. It's a fascinating, under sort of overlooked kind of topic. So yeah, Dave submitted the ethical study ethical sort of approval letter to Greenwich Ethics Committee, and even Dave said, and he specializes in studying weird, that there's like, what are they going to think when they receive this letter? Like, we want to do a study on like human interactions, experiences, encounters with large sentient seemingly sentient praying mantis entities. But we got the green light from Greenwich, and I'm sort of waiting on Dave actually. Any moment now, the study's ready. I just need Dave to check it, green light it from his end, and then we're going to share it over the interwebs, and hopefully get some data. So at the very least, get a scientific publication out of it. Maybe as well, possibly a book. Who knows? We'll see where it goes. But yeah, it's all pro bono, just driven by interest.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
That's really cool. Yeah, Maya.
Hello.
Hi.
Hey,
Hi.
Maya.
Sorry,
Oh, you've gone quiet now.
Yeah, we
You've
can't
gone
hear
in the
you.
dark and quiet.
I'm here.
Oh,
I'm here.
she's back.
It's just yes, in incognito mode. But yeah, that was super super interesting. Can you still hear me?
Yes, I
Yeah,
can.
we can
Yeah,
hear you.
Okay.
thank.
Yeah, that was super super interesting. Thank you.
Thanks.
Um I was just gonna go touch briefly back on like the consent model because I always think that it's more that we don't have the entity's consent when we just like burst in with
Mm.
DMT. And like I had
Mm.
someone try to get into my house the other day, like accidentally, and I was so pissed off. And I opened the door and I was like, what the fuck? Like I was so angry. So you can understand that
Yeah,
maybe some of the angrier entities are just like, what are you doing in my house? Like,
yeah.
and we've not asked their consent. So yeah, and the sort of tentacle down the throat thing, which is interesting because in a lot of alien abduction experiences, people are sexually assaulted. Um, but you never
Mhm.
do you even hear these experiences of people like being going in the ear because they seem to really be obsessed with the sexual orifices and the digestive orifices. Um, So yeah, I don't know. I wanted to ask about that. And then another question, sorry, which is not mantis specific, but connects to your various strains of research. But you were talking about, as we know, how people experience this profound shift in consciousness after meeting mantids, and we know that's a common outcome from DMT in general, but also a lot of your research is also into how psychedelics induce nature connection in people, and they start gardening and stuff though. But my question is there actually any evidence that these profound shifts change people's behavior in a productive way towards humanity beyond, just starting to go to ecstatic dance and talking excessively about their DMT experiences, which maybe people could accuse us of doing?
Yeah, no, no, all good, interesting questions. I'm glad I like your how you flipped the
Yeah.
consent thing the other way and sort of like, raising the kind of like the point that we're sort of like invading their sort of turf basically. And it's interesting actually, it's something that I forgot to mention in the presentation is the types of reactions that the mantids have on encountering us because it varies. Sometimes they're like curious and interested. Sometimes they are annoyed that like in quite a lot of experiences we suddenly will like appear and it's like we suddenly materialize or manifest somewhere that isn't really appropriate for us beings of our nature and like they're very busy with like doing doing their mad fantasy things.
Yeah, that could be them on the toilet.
Yeah, for I guess for
Mm.
all we know. What
Yeah.
one little interesting snippet actually from one experiencer, because I mentioned before, this is a little sub-factoid getting quite niche on the telepathy front. One experiencer had an interaction with the mantid, and the mantid at least claimed that it was capable of having 300 concurrent telepathic conversations all at the same time, which is like some doing. So if that's true, and obviously we're out on a limb here, that's showing their level of like of consciousness and what it's capable of. Regarding like the abduction, yes, I hear what you're saying about the the kind of like sexual trauma, alien abduction link, and I wonder if there's like a prior. I know there's been research on abductees, and some of them seem to be kind of like normal, like humans who just happen to have these mad experiences. But yeah, you're right that like some of them do have a kind of like sexually invasive, bodily orifice invading kind of aesthetic about like vibe about them. I don't know if the mantids are involved with that. And I know I've said that the mantids oversee the greys, but whenever I've heard of those obviously yeah, there was I know in Strassman's DMT research there was some stuff, wasn't there? There was that guy, that poor guy who got kind of raped by an interstellar crocodile.
Yeah,
Um
yeah.
that
I think
sounded
that's why they had to stop doing that study was because of
They had several dark experiences,
Yeah, they did.
including
But
that
you know
dark.
what, though? I think they had quite a few experimentally themed experiences there. But what's interesting is more recent DMT trials haven't had experiences like that. And you know that one of the things they had as part of the DMT Strassman's thing is they had like an anal probe thermometer that was in people having those DMT experiences. So they were literally being anally probed at the time of their DMT experiences. And we know that set and setting and these kind of things really get amplified when you're under a psychedelic. So that may have factored into some of those being sort of invasive. And they were also in a hospital environment, and there wasn't much care taken to make the setting non-hospital like, while wired up to machines and anal probed and all this stuff. So yeah, there's that. What was something else that you said? What was the last bit that you said, Maya? There was some interesting stuff.
um just on like, we've
Oh,
got yeah, yeah,
how people change, if people change, and how people change, like
yeah.
for the better, as in, do they treat people better rather than
Yeah, in
just
a
talk about how
proactive
cool they are?
way.
Um,
Exactly.
yeah, good. This is a good question, and one I'm really intrigued about. I was actually just sort of I was listening to a little snippet of someone's account having sort of met this mantid entity, and it's interesting that this guy was total atheist and sort of yeah, not in any way spiritual, didn't have any spiritual values, and he started having this reoccurring encounters with this entity, and only later, quite after quite a few encounters, did this entity reveal itself to be a mantid. It had only existed as like a sort of shadow or a disembodied consciousness that was talking to him. And then it showed himself to be a mantid. And then in his own sort of experience, he sort of started to pray for the first time. He started to believe that there was a divine force or God, for lack of a better term, behind the universe because this mantid was so damn confident that there was. And the Mantid transmitted to this guy that there are many advanced civilizations in the Milky Way galaxy alone, and some of them are dark, some of them are light. And the one way of sort of framing that dark light duality is that the light ones tend to prioritize service to others, whereas the darker ones are more about service to oneself, more individualistic. And humanity on planet Earth at this time is interesting because we very much encompass both. And we're at this kind of quite fragile, precarious time where we could destroy ourselves before we sort of advance to the next level. And at least in his case, granted, it's a single case. He described this particular case of this person getting really raggy up in his face and swearing at him. And like he said, before my encounters, I would have fought back and I would have had a fight with that person. But after that experience, he said, I love you to the person, and saying that he meant it. It wasn't just like a frivolous nicety. It was like he legitimately meant it. And he was surprised at how his own reaction sort of changed. So I feel like some of the after effects, and again, I've not done the research yet, which needs to be done, but some of the after effects that I sort of like get the vibe off from mantid encounterers definitely overlaps with the kind of changes that near death experiences report, where people do sort of have this awakening of like everything is more interconnected. It's good to be kind and good to other beings, other people, because we're all one universal consciousness in different facets, in different expressions. So I have a feeling that these experiences can produce lasting positive change. And they may also have a shadow side of inducing ontological shock and trauma potentially. I hope to find out more. In the survey I'm releasing with Dave, we will be kind of trying to shine a light on the after effects.
Yeah, that would be super interesting to read. But yeah, no, thank you. That was, yeah, very,
Thanks.
very interesting.
Thanks for your
Awesome.
questions.
David, you.
Thank you, Betwan, and thank you, Sam. As a fascinating topic, and I wish you well with the research study.
Thank you.
Um, I've not seen a mantis being, and after looking at some of your images and hearing Betwan's encounter, probably maybe glad that I haven't. I have I have seen lots of different entities
Mm,
on DMT, but I've never like seen a picture, an image or a painting or a photograph and thought, I've exactly seen that.
mm,
And vice versa, having looked at images now in books and your clips and battles, I've never then under a DMT experience thought, that's the being that Sam showed me last week. So for me at least, there's no kind of, I don't know, contamination from
yeah,
what you see and read versus experience.
yeah.
Um, I've mentioned this bit before to Batuan. I do wonder if there's like a dose dependency on what entities you encounter. So I know most people will smoke the DMT in powder form and get to breakthrough very quickly, like less than a minute. I usually use the liquid vape, which might take 5 to 10 minutes, and it's much more gradual. And
Mm,
it does vary a lot. But what might typically happen is you start to see like neon lines, like the outline of an entity, and then maybe cartoonish shapes, and then like a sort of harlequin jester I've seen a couple of times that's
mhm.
blue, pink, white, and black. And then, only after you keep going do I get the kind of non-digital beings. So
Yeah,
often reptilian, so sometimes humanoid, and a bit more, I say, analog rather than digital.
mhm.
Uh, it varies a lot. So your final points on ontology and human nature. So it has, since I first accessed it, it has kind of generated this fascination with the ontology, with the nature of the experience and what who these entities are, uh, and that that's I guess that's good and bad. I mean, it feels really important. It feels that DMT really is special, but it does kind of drive an obsession. I think for many of us, having had those experiences, in terms of does it make you a better person? I think for me, like I'll look at a lot of the other parts of life in a different light. Like
Mm.
I don't know, other parts of life seem less important that might previously have irritated you or you've got an intolerance to, maybe a bit more laissez-faire. There's bigger things to be interested in, at least for me. Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, no, thanks for yeah, thanks for sharing. And yeah, interesting regarding your first point and the possibility of contamination from, from other media and other sources. I think that's interesting because I know some psychedelic people obviously call out the whole expectancy priming thing, and they'll think that a lot of these encounters it's just like a kind of like a ripple effect of people hearing about, reading about, watching stuff about people's experiences, and then their kind of like mind latches onto that and then will like manifest it in their psychedelic experience. Like in my own, I don't seem to be entity prone, through no lack of through no
Yeah.
lack of like adventuring, and also in my waking physical life I'm very interested and in and appreciative of entities, but for some reason that trait does not apply to my psychedelic experiences. I've had like a brief encounter with like an octopus on Silo ayahuasca that was great actually, and then a humanoid figure of pure blackness that came to my front door when I'd kind of poisoned myself with an iboga plant
Ooh,
concoction. Yeah, I had an immaculate out of body experience. So I was standing outside my front door on my own in the house at night. But despite how dark it was outside, I could see this humanoid figure, and it felt very menacing, like it's coming to collect my soul. That this is it. So I kind of screamed and then woke myself back up in the body. Okay, that
yeah,
was a dream. I hope. Um, so that's it for me. And entities. I've seen an apparition a separate time when I was sober. Just a humanoid figure emerged, smoking. I saw the cherry end of a cigarette being toked, and then a fully clothed human male appeared out of thin air, looking me dead in the eyes, walking down the garden. Turned around to go in the house to tell my mum, and then it was walking in through the hallway of the house, looking over its shoulder at me. Weirdly, unlike the other experience, what surprised me about that one, no fear, no anxiety. I always thought seeing a ghost apparition would be unnerving, but it was like totally not, which surprised me, if anything. Yeah, so
Were you on any substance then, Sam?
sorry.
Did you see, how did you see these beings? Like, did you see them on like on substance?
No, yeah, well, the octopus was Silo so that was Syrian
Okay.
rue combined with
Interesting.
Panaeolus cyanescens mushrooms, which is a formidable psychoactive cocktail. The humanoid figure of purest black that came to collect my soul was like iboga whole root mixed with a few other plants. Very, very dangerous poisoning incident. Would not recommend. 1 out of 10.
Mm.
Don't. That was in my much more gung-ho, reckless psychonautic early days. But
Iboga with what did you say?
well, with like I think it was not iboga root bark. It was iboga whole root, which
Mm.
only contains traces of the active alkaloids with a bit of like Syrian rue, ayahuasca vibe. It was like any amount of like research said don't do that. That's really dangerous and reckless. But yeah, but it was a humbling learning experience. But it was very, very precarious. And that bit was like the peak of the revoltingness. But that felt menacing. I'd not had an experience quite like that before. But otherwise, I don't seem to see entities. I don't seem to encounter entities. I'm a bit jealous of people that, like yourself, that do have more kind of entity, yourselves that have more entity-rich kind of experiences. But yeah, in terms of, it's interesting, David, what you're saying as well, because I spoke to Chris Timmerman about this in terms of the types of entities that come up with DMT. and and it is pretty idiosyncratic and individual, in terms of what entities different individuals see. But then you do get these kind of like entity types that do seem to crop up more, like the jester clown entity, certainly one of the most commonly reported entities under DMT. And
Yeah.
what's intriguing to me though with the mantids is, as well as them occurring across so many different types of altered state, it's how incredibly consistent across different experience accounts the types of interaction um, are. For instance, the brain surgery thing on the DMT habit, but then getting down to the very fine grained nitty gritty detail, like the fact that so many of the mantids are adorned with purple cloaks. I mean,
Mm,
like, what part of the brain is doing that? Like, why is that a thing? So it fascinates me, the minutiae, the consistent minutiae of these experiences that seem to crop up quite a lot are fascinating. I think.
thank you.
I love, by the way, Maya said that perhaps we should lead an entity attraction workshop for lonely humans struggling to meet entities.
Unless you attract the wrong, because you might, it depends how do you filter the entities that you
Yeah,
attract? Because you might get some like needy, not cool ones.
yeah,
Maya, I hope you're factoring that in.
Well, I think
yeah.
that comes with why Batuhan, as an experienced entity encounterer, would lead it on how to identify a toxic entity from a good time entity.
Good. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm glad we can come together there and enact some kind of filtering process, because that is.
Yeah, yeah. But also, like, you never know. Maybe like sometimes years later, you realize that like the entity's agenda was, something else than you originally thought, and then, and also like if these intelligences are like interdimensional and like maybe from other dimensions, God knows, like we think we're intelligent, but they might be manipulating us on levels that we can't even
Mm,
comprehend.
yeah.
Sometimes I'm like, I got into DMT and psychedelics at a very early age. Am I gonna like, look when I'm on my deathbed, am I gonna look back at my life and then and at some point discover that am I gonna question like, I've just been, tricked into dedicating my life into, into researching this thing. So I'm like, but maybe I'm gonna be like, oh, maybe we're gonna find out that we were actually all the way from the beginning, we were tricked by the entities. Who knows?
Mm.
But Chris Petronzio,
Hello.
am I? How are
Hi.
you? You're new. You just joined us this today.
Yeah, thanks for
Yeah,
having me.
good. Yeah,
Um,
thanks for joining.
yeah, I guess I just really wanted to share a little bit about my experience with the mantids. Um,
Hmm.
it all
Yeah,
it
please.
all started with the mushroom around 10 years ago, um, with the Kundalini experience. It wasn't with them necessarily, but ever since that experience, my mushroom experiences like have never been the same, and it turned into this. Every time now it's like this textbook channeling of their energy into my body. And interestingly enough, I've never seen them. It's all feeling, and they enter through my left hand. I guess it's reversed. And they come in, and it's all very insectoidly, and they come into my body and then use my body to perform, like as they're if they're in me,
Mm,
and then they're talking to me and telepathically talking to me, performing these surgeries and using my hands to like perform different
mm,
things and channel the energy to do these surgeries. And I've had this like rapport with them for years and years now, where it's just every single time. Now, so it's been more ayahuasca, where um, the same exact thing happens as mushroom experience, where they enter into me, and it's really cool because the spirit of ayahuasca is like there. She's talking me through it, like, okay, like I'm gonna hand it over, and she's like saying it's gonna be okay, don't worry, like this is safe. Um, I'll be here with you the whole time, kind of energy talking, and then then the energy thing starts and they come into my body and start performing all these surgeries. And I have tons and tons of stories of all the different surgeries. They're so profoundly unbelievable, each one of them.
Wow.
I'm trying to think of one perhaps to share. The one I had this crazy neck pain for months, months and months. I was like, what is going on? I thought I slept on my neck wrong. Usually it goes away. Wasn't going away. Was trying different pillows. Nothing was working. Getting massages. Um, I went and had an ayahuasca ceremony. It's a 3 night ceremony, and the first night they came in and then they were like using my hand to like start massaging it, and they were like, oh, like we need to do some serious work on this and get this thing out of you. And I'm like, what thing? Like, what's in me? And apparently it was some dark spiritual, um, what's the word?
Parasite, maybe.
Parasite. Thank you. Yeah,
Mm.
exactly. It was some kind of dark parasite thing. And, grandmother's kind of like, don't worry, we're going to get this out of you. Um, and over the course of the 3 nights they were performing, then the mantids come in and we're performing the surgeries. And um, the second night they were doing more, and then they pushed it into the other side of my neck, and then it was there, and then it came back and went to back to where it was, and they were like, don't worry, we're going to get it. Third night comes around, they started attacking it, and attacking it I mean like using my hand. They're like getting in there, pushing energy into this thing, and then it pushed into my left shoulder, and then there was like this pop, and I like popped up, and this little mite, this small little black mite insect thing popped into my hand the exact moment, and I was looking at it, and the voice was just like, kill this thing immediately, don't let it get away. And it ran off my hand onto the mat, and I took a tissue and crushed it, and it had blue guts. um, and
Whoa.
I've never had the pain ever again. And it was the mantids that got it out. Uh, it's a
Wow.
pretty unbelievable thing, and I'm just really touching little pieces of the story. I could talk about it for hours, but yeah, they always come across as benevolent, and there is that fear I was mentioning about the harvesting of the emotions, because I do find myself being less emotional over the years. I used to always be like super sensitive, empath, constantly emotions, and it seems as though I've like chilled out over the years. And maybe that's a good thing. And maybe that's part of being the upgrade of not letting the emotions control my human experience as much. Sometimes it freaks me out because I'm just like, damn, I don't like feel things like I used to. But every time I have these experiences with them, it's always love and light and positive and healing. And I even have the tattoo, the mantis on my
Nice.
arm, because I'm kind of like in dedication to this like practice with them and helping
Wow.
the planet heal. So yeah, thank you for letting me
Cool.
share.
No, thanks, Chris. Thanks for
Yeah.
sharing. That's yeah, that's fascinating. That's amazing. And yeah, these kind of experiences of relationality where, it seems that over time people will kind of like have multiple experiences over the years, over the decades. And yeah, seems to be a thing. I'm not sure how common it is, but I've noticed that it is a thing among the mantid experiences. Is these formations of relationship or alliance, and usually all the things I've read, it's always been really positive and nice. And that's interesting as well in your instance that it's not like you're having a face-to-face kind of interaction with the entities. It's like they're sort of behind the scenes and sort of like puppeting you. And that's interesting, the puppeting thing. I'll make sure that that's in the survey because that definitely obviously seems to crop up with ayahuasca and the mushroom as well. And like sometimes it seems it's like the essence of the ayahuasca or the mushroom itself is kind of using you as a sort of as a puppet to explore what it is to be a kind of like in a human flesh suit, and it can kind of like, whereas other times like what you've described, it's like a kind of a never being or spirit is sort of interfacing. It's using the psychedelic as a sort of
Mhm.
direct hotline to the body, and will come in and sort of like do healing work and puppet. And it's interesting as well that that it does seem that the healing, the mantids as healers, does seem to be something that crops up. I mean, it crops up on a variety of psychedelics, but ayahuasca, it seems to be um,
Mm.
quite common actually.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, so but that's really interesting. Can I ask, with the Kundalini experience that you had, did that come before? Was it that was that did that occur independently of your mushroom experiences, or during a mushroom experience, or was it something that happened and then your mushroom experiences afterwards kind of deepened and changed and gave you access to the mented kind of interaction?
It was it was during a 5 gram mushroom experience. It was a full blown
Mm,
awakening for hours, just going through the spine, the whole thing of
yeah.
Kundalini. Um,
Wow.
Mhm.
and then after that specific experience, going forward, like the mushroom, and I didn't do ayahuasca until after that. So, but I was working with the mushroom
Yeah.
many times before that, and it's very distinctively different now. Where
Mm,
it's like it almost makes me sad because like the standard mushroom phases of like the come up and then the colors and then the introspection and this like that's all gone. It's just
mm.
like it's like 20, 20, 30 minutes in, gotta lay down. The entities enter me. It's
Yeah.
just like it's not the same
Yeah,
anymore.
I
Mm,
can relate to it so much. Like literally, like before I met the mantises, my life with mushrooms were like everything gets a bit psychedelic. You have introspection, like some some thoughts about life and blah and so on and so forth. Some mystical experience. I experienced the mantises. Like I said, they felt like they were upgrading me and then like installing some sort of like a 5G device to connect me to their dimension more. The following day and the day after, I had experiences of like auditory hallucination, more entities, like we were in a forest, like where a lot of like witch burning happened. Like I was feeling the anger and these like old witches, souls. I was like, what the fuck happens to me? It's like I'm like I didn't expect this. I'm like this is too much. And then as someone who's interested in aliens, like I didn't expect it to be like this entity full on. I'm gonna say two things. I want to like one about the um, entity parasites. I have a very strong experience with that. Another one about this little bug that I had. How do you call it? With ayahuasca. I like to start with that one. So, several years ago, like nearly a decade ago now, I was invited to an ayahuasca ceremony for the first time, and because it was, but I wanted to have my first experience in the Amazon jungle, and for several other reasons, like I had the urge, like inner calling that like I should go. That my I knew that I needed to go there, but then for several like silly things that that I believed in, I made myself believe. I decided not to go, and I could feel that night that something was missing, that I wasn't in the right layer of reality. And then the next day I woke up, I went to the park, and back then I was working on a music album cover for a rock band, and I was painting this beautiful alien, painting. And then that day I went to the park, and then I started painting on my tablet a blue creature, but they look very like with elongated skull and elongated hands, very feminine. Not like mantis like eyes, but like humanoid eyes. But I really think about blue. They were blue. They felt more like avians and like some sort of like ethereal spacey. But when I look at it now, they look a bit like mantises. And then at that moment, I remember as I was like painting it, I was in a bit altered stage experience as well. And a green bug landed on my tablet, and I started looking at that green bug, like really tiny green bug. And then I started looking at my green bug, and then the green bug then communicated with me and said, why did you not come to ayahuasca last night? And then it flew into my onto my head and it hit me. And I was like, what the fuck? And I was like, did I just make that up? But like, that was, I've never seen it, a bug attacking me like that, but like headbutting me, flying into me. And then I could feel that like there was some sort of like you know, um, some sort of like anger from Mother Ayahuasca being like boom, boom. Another thing that you say, by the way, is, when you vomited that bug that they told you to, like kill. I think some like Mexican shamans and hucholes, they have the ability to, suck negative energy or like parasites, and then they also spit it out in the ceremony in form of like rocks or like some other like crystals, and then you crush it and then or you burn it. That's a common thing. I don't know. Maybe Maya could tell us if she's still here because she's very close with that group Hucholes. And then another, Maya, do you want to say something about that, or should I move on to the other parasite experience?
Yeah, I can say a little bit. It occurred to me actually earlier when we were talking about the Ganesh's trunk and the tentacles, like the shamanic sucking element part of it, which is not just the Wiradika that do it, but they're really into it. And I
Yeah.
did have an experience with them where not down my throat, thankfully, but like with a very long where a Marikama used a very long pipe or tube to kind of suck out of um my stomach basically during a healing. And
Mm.
yeah, and so they will do the shamanic sucking and then they will manifest from you either, if it's something good, it's something like crystals, but if they're sucking out the kind of sickness, that can be various things from sort of like ash and tar to there's one Murakami that manifests rodents from people. So yeah, it's definitely interesting, and I think in relationship to these entities sucking, because it makes sense that the kind of technology or instruments that they're using shamanically are similar to the entities.
Mhm. Yeah, very, very interesting. And then also, like, thank you, Maya. And another thing that people also say, like, sometimes mantises, like, insert things and then, put things inside the human body. I don't know if there's any study that like, looking at those people's bodies, like could we maybe like scan their body with X-ray and then see if something has been inserted? I did read some stuff on the Reddit, about this that like they found, exactly at the same spot of their body, like, something inserted, but I'm not quite buying that yet. I think I want to like, see because that's quite like full on. And as I think like, if we can actually, if that's true, then, we have solid evidence for you guys, Sam, to get more funding for your research, then we have a reason. I'm gonna give another personal experience from the parasites. So several years ago, this is a quite sexual experience. So if you find this bit disturbing, I'm sorry, but like I'll try to cover it as much as I can. But basically, I nearly a decade I had a partner who was telling like I was just dating someone, and then from the beginning she was telling me like how she used to be very sexual, but then she started losing her libido, and then she just couldn't have sex for the past 2 years. And then, as we were like getting to know each other, like we were like, okay, like, we don't have to rush things, like, let's get to know each other. We had a really great time together. And then so we would like, spend nights together, but never sleep. And then one day when I was on an acid microdose, she came over and then we started, again mingling a little bit, and then she was like, okay, let's try it tonight. And I was like, all right. And then we got naked, doing the usual job. And then when I touched her, genitalia, like say clitoris in this sense, I had the closed eye visions. I think I also smoked some weed before that, and because of the LSD and the weed, like intense, I had closed eye vision. I saw this octopoid tentacles coming to me from her clitoris or like vulva, and like on a very invasive thing, like kind of like pushing me off. Then I was like, what the fuck was that? And then I did touch it again, and I saw these tentacles coming to me again, and I was very like, I wasn't welcome there. And then, up to after this experience, like several times we again tried to have sex, but like it just didn't happen. Maybe after I experienced that, I was also a bit freaked out. I'm like, I was also questioning, like, to what extent I made this up or not. Anyway, that relationship didn't last, and then, for several other reasons other than this. But then we broke up. Then 4 years later, 3, 4 years after that, I met I met another girl, an artist, who I was just friends, nothing romantic or anything sexual between us. We were just friends, and we were getting to know each other. And she was really into, like, she into mysticism, but she wasn't a psychedelic person. She was just like a smoke a lot of weed, like she was constantly high. She one day like invited me to her, and then she was telling me that like that we started talking about our sexual lives, and she was telling me like how she used to be very sexual, and then she started losing her libido. I'd completely forgotten about this other story by then. Then one day I went to her studio, and then we're in her art studio, we're completely sober, just like, wandering around in her studio. And then on the floor, I saw Maya. That's an interesting image. I saw eight drawings of a naked female body that had her legs open, wide open, and then from her vulva, pussy, octopus tentacles were coming out. And I looked at them, those drawings. I looked at her, I was like, that's you in those drawings. And then she was like, how the fuck do you know that? And I was like, that's the tentacle being that, that's sucking your sexual energy. And she was like, what the fuck? And she freaked out. And then I told her this because then she told me that like she would have these visions like when she was high on weed. And then I told her this experience that I had previously. And then it was like quite like, scary thing to experience when I saw that in someone's dream, because as an artist I know that like I really like getting really stoned and just painting, drawing. I had a period where I would just like do free drawing to see what's going on in my subconscious mind. And then I was questioning, like whether she was doing the same thing, and almost like her mind, her consciousness was aware of that. In the case that let's consider this, sexual energy like an octopoid, what's that? Invasive species is real and parasite, then maybe like her altered self, or like her higher consciousness was trying to tell her through these drawings that what was going on. It was just a very interesting. David Rakowski also had a couple of experiences recently where like this elephant, this time octopus being, Viracocha came and then pulled out smaller octopuses. They were more like how do you
Mm.
call it? Invasive, and so what's
Mm.
that, parasite.
Mhm.
So but like it was, one octopus taking out all the other parasitic octopus. And like you were saying, Sam, like, the different species, and there's like good and bad ones. So very quite interesting. I was super scared of octopuses for a long time. Like just didn't feel connected. And until I came across David's research actually. Another time that, during those times I had a DMT experience in which I saw octopus tentacles coming to me. And then as soon as the experience ended, I turned my phone on, and then my friend, like it was like what, 4 or 5 in the morning on a Sunday morning, my friend was start calling me. I just switched my phone on from the airplane mode off, and then my phone started ringing, and I picked that up, and my friend was like, "Oh, I need to, I have I need someone. Can you come over?" I was like, "All right," and I went to her place, 5 in the morning, got off my bike, and then walked into her room, and every single word there was like an octopus painting and an octopus like optical images, and I was like, "Fuck!" And then this is weird, like it's like I just had an octopus experience 30 minutes ago in DMT. And like she was just like, I don't know, like she even like her back then we used to use Facebook, like her Facebook images were about like all octopuses. Anyway, that's by the way the image that Maya posted, like from the Little Mermaid. That's the
Mm.
type of like dark octopus energy that like I feel from that's really interesting because in Japanese erotic female sex
Mm.
with tentacle octopus. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. In Japanese, that's really true. Yeah, do you want to add to that, Maya, about the Japanese ones?
Yeah, just that it's like a really common trope, as is kind of, well, sexual encounters with kind of monsters and alien types and octopoids in general, much more than in the West. But yeah, I never really conceptualized it as like a sort of a parasitic entity in terms of those depictions, but I guess it potentially could be. I think I'm
Mm.
not sure. Like sometimes it's depicted as like a kind of feminist thing, but then I think in more like horror stuff, it's depicted as like a parasitic entity, which it seems like the encounters
Hmm.
you've had, Batu, are.
Hmm. Yeah.
Weirdly,
I-
I also did like a self-portrait a few years ago with like tentacles that I'll post in the chat as well.
okay, interesting. Yeah, I would love to see that. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I think I know someone actually. She's into shamanic work. I think she uses like shamanic drum, she journeys to a drum beat and she uses like non-psychedelic practices but accessing an altered state. And I think she had a parasitic attachment, and I think it was also that she kind of became aware of while in an altered state. And I think it too was like a kind of octopus, like a small octopusy like thing. So that's I mean, I guess, they can take different forms. Like, yeah, some of them may be like more parasitic, like like different humans have different agendas, like different species that have different agendas. So yeah, and even with the mantids, it seems like although experiences tend to be benevolent or neutral, it seems according to some experiences, they come in a lot of different forms, and and they have a lot of different things to say about a lot of different topics, both pertaining to you as an individual and yeah, more kind of cosmic
Mhm.
interdimensional stuff.
That's a nice image, by the way, Maya. Very old school Procreate.
Yeah, maybe I'll finish it now.
Mm.
Is this the okay? Yeah. Ooh. Any other comments? Any other thoughts? Anyone?
Oh, just one little thing, yeah, that might be of interest to people. Like, people have asked the mantis, like, what is your deal? What are you? What are you? What are you about? How are we meeting now? And like some of the mantis have sometimes expressed that basically they inhabit realms of consciousness that are around us all the time, but basically when we alter our consciousness, whether it's through, meditation, psychedelic taking, out of body experience, dream, stuff like that. Even those experiences that I described of the people, of the guys fishing in New Jersey who had those encounters, you can tell by those the way they described the symptoms that were like precursors to the experience, they also seem to be accessing an altered state. They described that those humming vibrational sounds and feelings, and they were sort of like rooted to the spot with what was going on, and that sort of like feeling of when the mantis was accessing their consciousness, they felt very at peace with it. It was only when the mantis withdrew from them that they freaked out, actually, more interestingly, rather than when it was actively like kind of like linked up to them. But it's like, yeah, they kind of say that when we're in these various altered states, we kind of like more spill over into the realms or planes that they happen to be inhabiting, and that's why we end up bumping into them. Um, I think there was a story. This guy Hieronymo, who works with ICEERS, told me of one of his contacts who got really into Tibetan Buddhist practice. And he had been meditating, and then one day he like bumped into what he described as like a 6 foot grasshopper entity in his kitchen, which kind of, as you'd expect, kind of like surprised him. And he tried to sort of brush it off, and then he was like walking down the street one day and he bumped into another one of these giant insect grasshopper beings. So he talked to his mentor and he's like, why am I seeing giant humanoid insects? No one said this was part of the ascension process. And he was like, and the guy was like, well, young Padawan, you're refining your consciousness now through the practice of meditation, and you're beginning to sort of like access other realms, vibrational frequencies, dimensions of consciousness. The one that's closest to this base physical reality is one that is inhabited by all manner of different beings and taking on many different forms. And like it seemed to be that, like this base physical reality, the beings there were both neutral and also positive and negative in tone. Whereas once you start ascending in vibrational frequency, the the inhabitants of those more rarefied, more refined dimensions of consciousness, they tend to be more refined and rarefied and divine themselves. But in the kind of dimensional realms that most are aligned with ours, that are most easily accessed, you'll meet entities of various different kind of like agendas and persuasions. But I thought that was quite interesting because it both the Mantid's interpretation of what's happening and this particular Tibetan Buddhist meditators model, they kind of link up. Yes, I'm definitely cherry picking two very, very, very niche points of view there, but I thought that was quite interesting how they basically see eye to eye. Maybe.
Yeah, a lot of maybes in this webinar.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, any other comments, anyone? Has anyone ever had experienced mantises or any other entities? Mm. Isaac, I actually have a question for you. Are you still there, or would you take a question?
Are you
Isaac.
talking to who are you talking to, Betan?
To Isaac, who's one of the girl. Is here. Yeah, I
Was
think
I
it's.
summoned?
Yeah, yeah. You okay, Isaac? How are
Hi.
you?
Yeah, I'm good. Are you all right?
Yeah, good, good. Is there like like how we talked about because you have an incredible knowledge in Christianity. Is there any mention of mantises in Bible or because in like I said in Islamic culture they're considered as the prophet's insects or prophet's camel. Is there anything like that in Christianity?
No, nothing in terms of like a specific mantis type being.
Yeah.
No, it's,
Okay.
that's all there is to it. Unfortunately for you, sorry.
Yeah. No, I was just really curious. Okay. Cool. I have something to show. I mean, if you have anything to say, feel free. But I want to show something. I can't find it. Where did Here we go. Sam, do you know about these ones? And I'll show it to everyone. I find this really interesting. These ones. These are cave paintings from
Oh,
Australia,
yeah.
and
Oh, okay. This is Australia. This is Australia.
I think
Interesting.
this is not 4,000. It's a lot older than that. But like basically, it's not just like they look like mantises, but like the locals that made this. It's in their oral tradition. These beings are known as the cosmic doctors, some of the cosmic
Mm.
healers.
Uh-huh.
I'm like, wow, they don't just look like mantises. They're also known for healing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That is interesting.
yeah.
Yeah.
And like in my personal experience with mantises, like this is how they look like. When you're like they're like you see
Mm.
the silhouette and then you see the eye and
Mm.
quite interesting. It's similar to
Yeah.
the Ant-Man's,
It
of
is actually. I was just
yeah,
thinking that. It's yeah.
this one as well. This is look, these are look really mantis as well.
Mm.
Yeah, this
Yeah, I
one looks like
mean
a
it's
tentacle.
yes.
Some of these ones, by the way, are AI generated.
Uh-huh.
So be careful. Like for example, this one
Yeah.
is AI generated. This one is
Yeah,
AI
check your
generated.
sources.
Yeah, check your sources. Like double check because like even now we're working on a documentary and then sometimes I get like from people that work in the production sending me stuff on Instagram or WhatsApp about like crazy like alien rock paintings of like this is the legit one
Mhm.
because I know they look a bit like mantis like
Mm.
Basically, like it's just like the internet is flooding with like false information, especially around DMT as well.
Mm.
Okay, Tony, you have your
Yeah,
hand up. You want to say something? Oh no, we can't hear you. We need to unmute you.
right. Now,
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
can you hear me? Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. Um, looking at these cave paintings, I was reminded of a substantial part of Graham Hancock's book Supernatural
Yeah.
is about um, uh, the cave paintings, particularly but not exclusively in northern Spain and France. But he also he went to Africa, spoke to San Bushmen and their shamans and people like that. And his idea is that the paintings depict the psychedelic experience, and that um, the what are they called? Terianthropes. So where it's
Yeah.
a mixture of yeah, that
Human,
that
right?
that actually depicts um, the transition that the shaman goes through on their spiritual journey. Um, and I'm wondering whether when you say the Aboriginal people of Australia refer to these beings as the cosmic healers,
Mm-hmm.
do they experience them in as part of a psychedelic experience, or do these beings come to them completely outside of the shamanic experience or the ingestion of psychoactive plants? I mean, I think part of the trouble is, of course, these were painted 10, 15, 20,000 years ago, so you can't actually ask the people who did them. But I mean, I'm just wondering if anybody knows that amongst Aboriginal culture, whether they have stories of these beings appearing to them randomly, or whether they only see them through through the shamanic process, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I mean that's really interesting. Like in Graham Hancock's case, I got the book here actually. Yeah, Supernatural. Yeah, this one. Yeah, it's like that book blew my mind. I got that book the next day after my DMT injection, and I started reading about it, and I was like, and then there's so many like, and I didn't even like made any connection to the psychedelics and the cave art. I was like when I was reading, I was like, what is this book about? I want to actually show you some in Graham Hancock. So what I was gonna say is like in Graham Hancock's theories, and that's like what he questions is his questions are like rock art paintings. They usually like they're usually deep in the gate cave. So and if you think about a cave, it's like you know like the further inside you go, like the darker it gets. So his question is always like, why do they always choose to go this deep into the cave and paint these beings, in the dark? Were they like doing some sort of like shamanic drumming, shamanic, ceremonies? And like recently, it's been found that some shamanic drumming and dancing ceremonies were taking place on those caves because I think they found some sort of like flute or like a beat instrument. And yeah, what I wanted to also show is there's some interesting paintings from Graham Hancock's book, which are, so I'm going to show you. Can you all see this one here? So there are lots of paintings of shamans being pierced with some like strange nodes. And look at this one. And they compare like they thought about they look at the way how they're pierced, and it doesn't look like actually it's not like a spear or an arrow, but like there's so many like paintings like this, and like almost like mantis looking being also getting pierced through. And then a lot of like modern DMT experiencers, they report like having things attached to their body. And I once woke up in a lab like this with this, needles attached all over my body, um bit like Neo wakes up. Like in the Matrix, when Neo wakes up, there, but
Oh yeah, it's when he's having his muscles remade, isn't
Inci-
it?
Incidentally, I love that picture of you and Graham Hancock walking past each other.
oh really? Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think that's,
this one here. Yeah. I went to see him for the winter solstice in December. So after that, like I was just inspired to, visualize our experience. It's quite nice. Um, yeah. I absolutely adore Graham Hancock. He's like a fourth in this field. And where is it? Can you all see this one here? Yeah.
Yeah.
And like this one, yeah. Exactly this. So I woke up exactly like that when I was like after I saw the Ganesh, like I woke up exactly like that. And then this is similar to this. So a lot of people report waking up like that. Like a couple of months ago, I met this guy at an AI event, and then he was telling, as soon as he found out about my DMT experience, he was like, "Oh yeah, I got given 10 grams of mushrooms at Boom Festival. I ate them all, and then I woke up in the lab and I saw these beings were doing research on me. They were like attaching things. I was like, well, what are the chances that those beings were like insectoid mantises?" And he just went like, "What?" Like he was like, "How the fuck do you know?" Yeah. Another thing that I find really interesting is like from the Matrix, like the main robots that attack in
Mm.
the Matrix, they're really octopoids. Like they're like jellyfish octopus like. So I'm like, and Wachowski now they're Wachowski sisters. I'm like questioning because they are into DMT. They have other shows like Sense 8, which is about DMT. I'm like, to what extent they got their inspiration from the DMT experience? Yeah. Interesting. Some food for thoughts. Yeah, this is quite dark. Anything else? Any other questions? Some people wrote the holiday of giants at this other. Okay. Um, if you don't have any more questions, let's call the day then. Yeah, very excellent presentation. Yeah,
Cool,
Mhm.
thanks. I'm glad you
Yeah,
enjoyed it, Isaac. Thanks
yeah, really good.
for peeps tuning in on a Sunday evening to listen
Yeah.
to me/us yabber on. And yeah, it's good to have peeps in the mix and have,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, everyone's
Mm-hmm.
questions and
Yeah.
interactions.
And then when you guys launch your study, we will make an announcement and put it into the newsletter.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Really appreciate that, Batahan. I was even going to suggest, Batahan, maybe that a conversation for another time, but after you and Maya cooked up that very funky wizardy clip, I was wondering if there might be any chance of like a similar-ish themed clip to act as a little study recruitment little appetizer. I'm going to make a banner image, like a banner,
Yeah.
like weave some mantis figures together to
Mm.
try and make a nice landing page for the study. Um, but yeah, don't know if that would be a possibility. If it's not too much kerfuffle, if it is, definitely don't worry about it.
No, but we can let's chat about it. By the way, it's this video that Sam he's just saying. So it's like this is David. Look, Sam. No, definitely, I would love to help you, Sam, with it. So let's chat about it next week. And
Okay, cheers. No,
yeah,
it's I just thought I'd
yeah.
put it out there.
Are you going to be sharing it in scientific communities?
Yes, I mean, like, I'm waiting on Dave to I keep nudging Dave because I think he's fucking busy, but it's the survey's written on his Greenwich Uni Qualtrics platform,
Oh,
and he
this is the
basically
best bit.
Hmm. Yeah,
and
yeah.
he
This
needs to check it. and green light it and get it off. And I can't. Yeah, I've politely nudging him to do so, but hoping to it will happen soon.
Yeah,
Um,
sure.
and yeah, we'll get it hopefully get it published and then sort of in an accessible open access
Oh,
format and share it and stuff.
perfect. Yeah. Cool, everybody. Let's get a picture taken for like this week's picture. Is everybody here? Hello. Hi, Jonathan. And whoever is, can we turn on our cameras and get a picture taken? Anybody wants to be in the group picture of this week? It's nice one. Seems that we have a bit of a more shy crew this time. Yeah.
Maya's being shy, but I think she gave
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm actually not in a. I'm actually in the bath, so.
Fair enough.
Epic, epic. Okay, let's get a picture taken. Woof. And I'm just gonna get this ready. Maya, do you think you could take a picture? I'm gonna do it. Okay. Hey. Mark, Andre, yeah, you guys are hello. Okay.
Ready? Cheese. I mean mantises.
Mantis! Mantises! Okay.
Cool.
Maybe we do like this, maybe. Should we do like this?
Oh, actually, yeah,
Yeah,
that
let's
is
do this. Yeah,
actually
yeah. Maya, can you take are you able to take a picture,
it's
Maya?
kind of like this.
Yeah, yeah, I'm taking it. 1 second.
They usually have them sort of together.
Brilliant.
Okay, perfect. Great. Thanks everybody and see you next week. Take care. Bye bye.
Cool, cheers.
Bye.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Sam.
everybody. Take
Thanks everyone.
care.
Bye bye. Thanks, Maya.
Bye.
Bye.